everyone, and thank you for joining the call today. So how this thought came to my mind was that after graduating from university, I was really looking forward to doing something useful, let's say, for the society. And so I started looking for jobs in, let's say, international developments and different humanitarian places that they were hiring. And the more that I looked, the less I saw there was any position open for an architect role, even though basically what those, let's say, international development places or those humanitarian places was, they were doing architecture. Like they were basically building houses, but they didn't have any architecture role open. And then I understood that this is not only in the humanitarian world, there is the same issue going on, let's say in the development world. So if inside the city, they are building houses for, let's say, migrants or for homeless people, there is everybody involved, from the human rights people, like people who study human rights, to policymakers and even psychologists, but there is no architect on the team. And as later a bit I got involved with the policymaking board, I understood that, at least in my mind, that somehow designers and architects were this missing link between the two worlds. So we were the ones that could do the implementation and, let's say, the monitoring of the policies that are on a daily basis being built, but we were not there. We were not in the spaces of decision making. The decision making was happening, and so we had no say in, let's say, how to build, what to build, and why to build. So this situation creates these two different worlds of policymakers making policies that don't go to implementation and monitoring, and then architects that are working in the architectural studios are completely living in another world and are continuing to do the same things as what's it's called mainstream architecture today. So yeah, and then there are parts of humanitarian architecture happening, and that's great, but most of the time it could not be sustainable in terms, because the people that are joining the humanitarian board, sometimes they are not paid well, so they cannot continue it for the rest of the world. So how can we actually change these dynamics for the mainstream architecture to be architecture that is responding to all that we want to? So as Design to Connect, which is this social design podcast that I'm one of the co-founder of, we decided to make these calls that is going to be also more regular, hopefully. And yeah, just deepen on this conversation and see how can we start. So first, I'm gonna put the link of to the podcast in case anyone is interested here, and then I'm gonna copy the questions that I sent you already, so we can all reflect on them. But I'm just gonna read them out loud, and then we can move forward. So how would design and SDGs, how would design with the SDGs in mind could look in a city through urban development? How could architects be involved, or let's say more involved in policymaking at city level, international level, and national level? And how could we be the ones who does the implementation part of the work? So let's say if UN Habitat says everyone has the right to housing, how can we actually do that? So who wants to go?
Thank you so much, Arju, for your wonderful introduction and the initiative for the SDGs. I believe SDGs are quite vital in anywhere where architecture is taking place, whether it's the interior design, whether it's the architecture part of the city as well, whether when it comes to urban planning as well. So there are three different types of scales where we can actually plan to add more of the sustainable elements to our designs. Unfortunately, of course, I do agree that we are not actually involved in policy making. When it comes to the institutes, we are not involved. We architects are not there to actually talk about the policies, to actually talk about how things could work in favors of architects once they're designing for a client or for an institution or any such that. I do have the similar concern in Pakistan as well, because once we're talking about sustainability and all the sustainable elements when it comes to materials, when it comes to designing, there are a lot of barriers when it comes to place. What I feel is, I'm going to tell you about what I feel and what I have the opinions regarding the barriers of being sustainable. I think the very first thing that comes as a barrier is the costing of materials as well. Once we are talking about the using of sustainable materials, so once we are talking about that, it does not go very pocket friendly as well. Of course, of the political dynamics and all the economical issues as well. So that's one barrier that has been, and all. I don't know how we're going to solve that and how we'll be making it better. But this is one of the problems that I see, because there are people who are no one is equal in finances, right? There are people who are below the poverty grade. There are people who are actually good in financial stability, and there are people who are rich and they don't care about the finances at all once they're designing. So we deal actually with three types of people, three types of clients, and all of them have different aspects to that. And that also impacts our design as well. So the first thing is about the finances of the materials. The second part is the impact on the design itself when it comes to the pricing, and then the other factors. And then once you're talking about the policy making, I feel like because there is so much power in terms of institutions and all, they can make a change, but they're not willing to have architects on board because they think, I don't know, there might be any personal issues with us. I don't know. But in certain situations there are. So that is, I think these are the three major chunks which I believe are the barriers when it comes to sustainability, because we architects have been talking about sustainable architecture since a long time. So it's not something very new, but I don't see any actions or implementations about it. Right? So we have been talking about it. Like I know since my school, we have been talking of using sustainable materials, and this is one of the main concept of our design. But then when it comes to implementation, it all goes back to zero because costing issues or something, right? So please share your opinions about this as well. I don't know how we're gonna solve this up. I'm pretty much looking forward to discuss all these things with you guys as well. And I think it's one of our very first interactions. So I'm looking forward to have a long journey with all of you.
Thank you so much, Ali.
Yeah, I think you hit on many of the key topics, and I think that from my perspective, especially costing and especially especially costing is going to be the driver. But what the way to get around that and the way to really influence that is from my perspective, is very much from the policy standpoint, because as a designer, yes, we've been talking about sustainability forever. And when you show up in a client meeting or a design meeting or with anyone, and you're putting forward sustainable ideas, almost everyone is on board and in agreement. This is great. We should do this, until the point in the process for the costing. And then when the materials are more expensive or it's going to be an additional cost, that's when it gets cut. And so I think from a policy standpoint, that's where it has to be, or that's one of the key tools of defining how it goes. And then there's often, in terms of change, when it's policy led, there's often funding that can be incorporated into those policy changes from a top down level. Of course, pushing and for the implementation of those can be from a more bottom down, and pushing for those policy changes can be from a grassroots level. But I feel very strongly that we need architects at the table to be involved in the conversations where those policies are decided. One of the things an example that I often share, just from my own sort of work experience in New York in about 3 years ago, to that fall of 2019, we had a major change in the building code policy here, where any new construction, any new building over a certain size, or any renovation of a building over a certain size, the roof was required to either be green roof or have solar panels on the roof. That's a policy change, very, very small change on paper, very, very simple change that came through environmental, people in environmental groups advocating for that change. And then when you as a designer are showing up to a client meeting, you have that as a tool to say, okay, before that meeting, my experience, we would always as a designer, you'd be like, okay, let's use the roof for something sustainable. Let's put green roof. Let's put solar panels. Let's use that roof in a productive way, which is just an opportunity that is so often missed. And so frequently, the clients are on board. Yes, let's do that. But then when it comes again to the costing phase, it gets cut. Now we have a tool as designers, because of that change in the policy, you can't cut it anymore. And so you make adjustments elsewhere because the rules have changed. And I think as designers often just accept for given building codes, zoning regulations, that we're working with every single day. They define our output, they define what we do, they influence every decision that we make. And so often we accept those as just given situations, given conditions. But really we need to be at the table, pushing for the changes that we want to see, whether it's in sustainability, whether it's in many other factors that are incorporated into the SDGs and other, goals and missions that we have as designers. And at some point, along the way, those rules were written, they were made. We actually see, I think, more progressive change on a lot of those on the policy level in the developing context, because in many places those rules are still being written or being developed. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, but then there's a responsibility to go back to places where those rules are, a little bit more established or old and just built into the industry, that get, built into the education and our training and our certification or licensure processes. And they just get repeated because it's just an accepted value, and we have to push on those. So that's my quick inputs.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. Here, I'll start my video. Okay, so yes, what Justin was just saying, I completely agree. Like, architects deserve a seat at the table in terms of policy making. And I think regarding the cost issue, I have seen that there is money out there. We've seen, like costing is allocated to things that the sector prioritizes, whether that's like emergency relief or whatever seems more urgent or is more urgent at the time of, a project. And I think making good design, like a sustainable design priority in these decision-making processes, that ideally would lead to the allocation of the funding to the architectural process and the more robust research beforehand and understanding of the context and the situation. And I think if it's prioritized appropriately, then design would be well supported. Or sustainable products and the use of the right kinds of materials and the most culturally appropriate solutions to emergencies or crises. And I think I agree. At the moment, it seems like there's just not a lot of support out there. So how do we do that? What I've guessed and what I hope is that if we just mainstream SDGs in architecture, or architecture and SDGs, and make that just a normal practice as much as possible, then within the system, we can change it just by doing the thing and just by pursuing projects and pursuing partnerships that allow us to implement our SDG agenda in the design world, and to sort of, sorry about construction noises, to just experiment with like more sustainable practices, best practices in our work that will then influence the sector. But sometimes you cannot influence policy before you do the thing. So we have to find a way to incorporate this best practices into our work now, and then the policy will follow, ideally. But that's always not guaranteed. That's just the way that I hope we can change the system, is just by doing it and mainstreaming it, and and hoping that it will catch on. But that's kind of where my mind leads, and I'd be curious to see what other people think about like how do we mainstream sustainability and resilience in our current work and change the policy from the inside. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that one of the important things is also to remember that, you know, as a sort of an advocate for either a client or a customer or a community or whoever the stakeholders are in the design process, we have a certain influence over the market when we're, you know, specifying certain materials or specifying certain products, and and that's sort of one of the ways that we start to move things, because, you know, when enough people are requesting something or purchasing something, yes, the cost is going to go down, the demand for it's going to go down, the technology is going to be pushed in a certain direction, which I think is super important. And then also, yes, of course, demonstrating that it's possible, demonstrating that it can be beautiful, demonstrating that it can be functional, demonstrating the benefits of making those decisions in the design process are all super important. And then I think taking those examples, taking those demonstrations to the policy level, taking those to the spaces where those decisions are being made, and showing, hey, this is possible. This is how it can be done. I think, again, bringing that into the education process, you know, as designers, we have a responsibility to impart those goals and those visions with the next generation, because so often when you enter an office context as a designer, there's a hierarchy. There's, you know, folks in the office that have been there for, you know, in the industry for decades, that have kind of an expected way that things are going to work. And so I think, you know, keeping that education and always trying to stay on top of pushing the conversation in the industry forward. And then, yeah, in terms of practice, just, yeah, demonstrating both from a practice standpoint, but also from a product and an output standpoint of both, you know, what it can look like and how it can be done. Because so often I think, you know, we have so many issues in our work to focus on that we just fall back into the patterns that have been set down in the past. And so having to break out of those past patterns is really important.
Well, I do agree with Carly and Justin both. What I think is how we can actually mainstream that is by making, or maybe, you know, raising more questions, or, you know, having more trends along the social media as well. Of course, there have been a lot of, you know, talks regarding sustainability and the use of it, but we can actually raise questions and keep on raising questions, you know, just to not to make it personal for these people who are the current policymakers, but to just give them this push that, you know, these are the questions that can be asked by you. So when the people, like Justin said, that we can have this awareness among the next generation, right? So we can actually raise these questions among our generations, and they can do the same thing with the coming generations, right? So I think raising questions of certain problems would actually help us to come in the trend. I think we need to trend this part of sustainability in the daily posting or daily awareness of social media as well. And that is where we can actually ask normal people, not only the policymakers, but all these normal people, because once they have this confidence that things can work, because I'll tell you very honestly, people for whom we design, the clients that we have, they're also lazy. But if, for example, if you give them this green roof to on their house, right, they won't maintain it. It's going to be a month and it's going to go all dry. So people are lazy as well. So we need to push them that once you need to have sustainability in your designs, you need to maintain it as well. If there is something, some sort of material that has been used in your house or in your office, clean it, keep it maintained. Don't just think that if it's sustainable, it's going to last for like 20 years or so, because there is a life. And that is the same thing with every client as well. We need to guide them. So I'll tell you something from my personal experience. I designed, I think it's been a year, I designed one rooftop for a client. And it was a luxurious rooftop where there was this barbecue setting, juice bar counters, gathering spaces with a fire in between. There was something great. There was a mini cinema there as well. But the client did not maintain it for 6 months. And of course, it's a rooftop. It's near the sea. It's going to get rusty. It's going to get dusty. So one has to maintain that. There's a use of wood there. Of course, there's a use of every rough material there as well. But of course, the maintenance is very important as well. So people think, or normal clients think, that once you're using sustainable materials, there's no need to maintain that. So this is a dilemma as well. So we need to raise proper questions that can actually make them think that, yes, we need to do that. We as architects need to do, we all have our own responsibility as well. So there's no one-sided story. There's always two-sided story to every project as well. So there's certain part for the client to do, there's a certain part for us to do as well. And by raising these questions, we can actually push the ones who are actually making the policies. Because I think in my country, basically, the ones who are making the policies are not proper architects. They're the ones who have the power, but they're not architects. So they just think for a second or so, I think. And we are the ones who think beyond that. And I'm sure, like Justin mentioned also about the policies to have green roofs. Once you were talking about that, recently there has been change of policy. That's a good policy. But one has to maintain it as well. Because if you don't maintain your solar panels on the roof, they're gonna go all dusty and it's gonna be of no use, because solar panels are also very expensive. And once you install solar panels, the amount that has been recovered, or the amount that you save, is not saved instantly. It's a long-term plan, and people back off very easily. They just need to, if they just get to know that prices are high, they're gonna back off. That is one of the problems as well. So I think overall we need to raise questions and keep raising questions. The solutions, we can give a lot of solutions to them, and they will be like, oh yes, okay, that's great, but they won't go for it. They will be like, okay, this looks good, but they won't go for that. We need to raise questions so that once they realize it, they plan to apply that. That's my input.
Thank you so much, Ali. I think another thing like that we could work on is also like the perspective of and how actually architects are viewed in the society. Because I think still when I talk to a lot of my friends that are not architects, and whenever I talk about like social architecture or humanitarian architecture, they're like, we didn't know architecture can go there, can care about those things. So I think, I don't want to say educating general public, but bringing these conversations also with our friends, or in our posts, not talking only to architects, but also talking to a more wider, let's say, audience, and tell them what architecture can actually do. It's not just making artistic projects that look good and that's it. So I think kind of, I don't know, communicating that also can be a step forward somehow. And then
I'll just make a quick note, and I'll just make a quick note in response to that. And I think part of it is demonstrating the role that we can play. But I think the other thing, in terms of a perception and a reputation, that often will get in the way of architects playing a role in this kind of work, is the perception that we come in with a huge ego, that we come in with this this pride of place, this master planning kind of perspective. And I think that's such a barrier for us participating in this change and participating in this work. And I find that showing up to these conversations, showing up to a policy table where, you're dealing with folks that don't have the same, architectural background training, that, showing up and not bringing your ego, like checking your ego at the door and coming in and just, learning and listening from folks that are policymakers, and not acting like, I know all the answers and all the solutions. And the same thing with clients, the same thing with contractors, the same thing with everyone along the process, is that, we need to come in asking questions and learning from everyone else at the table as well, and then input our suggestions and always be collaborative. But I find that the idea of the architect on a pedestal up here with this sort of top down, this is how it's going to be done, and it has created a very special place in our cultures and our societies for architecture, but it also has created this combative relationship, or this relationship where we're very isolated, and we're just sort of sending out, and we're not working with everyone else. And I think that's one of the really, really big important changes, and one that I try to always bring to my own work and my own practice, and to demonstrate again to colleagues, especially the next generation that I'm always working with, is don't fall into that trap of pretending like you need to be better than everyone at the table, or that you need to have all of the answers, because we don't have all of the answers. And I understand why at times we feel pushed to, but we have to come in and work more collaboratively. With that, I'm so sorry, I do have to run to another meeting, but I really wanted to at least join the conversation, and I look forward to the next ones.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Justin. And
Yeah, thank you so much,
let me know
Justin.
about it.
Cheers. Thanks
But
all.
I think before leaving, he's laid a very strong point on that ego part. Whether it's the contractors, whether it's the client, I think I think this point actually isolated us as well, and made us stronger in any other way as well. But more, it has made us very isolated between, even between architects as well.
Yes.
Not only between contractors and architects, but between architects as well. I have faced a lot of issues with that, and I've been always saying to my colleagues and to my people who are architects that, look, what I believe is that in order to be an architect, you know something about everything. I'm not saying you should know everything, but you should know something about everything. I think that clears everything. And all these egos and all these things should be kept aside. And that is where, once I was starting my own practice in my venture, that is where I named my venture as Adroit Collaboratives, because I want to collaborate with people. There is no success once you're going alone in any platform, in any field. So I think there's a huge gap. I think we need to disclose this gap as well. I think we need to raise questions. There's a lot of work that we can do, but we need to do it responsibly.
Completely agree. And again, so sorry to leave, but thanks for the great conversation. Happy to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Justin was saying also goes back to our education. How we are trained as architects, that we have a very big part throughout education, and through the jury, when we meet with the jury members in our design, we always have to defend what we have done. And it's a skill that you have to build through your architecture education, to not to listen and to look that you've done something great already that doesn't need any changes to it. So I think that's something that also has to start with education somehow, our ego part.
I think you'll also agree with this point that, and your point is valid as well, because once we were studying, we also had to defend, our jury members and a lot of things. And at one point we had this perspective of, just whatever it is, I need to defend myself, that there was this point. But I think because right now I've been in conversation with a lot of my instructors who were there, And right now they're one of my mentors as well. And now we plan on working together as well. Now we see each other as colleagues. So I remember last night that he was mentioning me because I planned to be a juror as well for some time into academics and all. And he told me that, we have to actually add value in people's life. We need to actually help students, and we need to make sure that when students are talking about this, they also understand that we are here to help. We're not here to just thrash them down or just criticize. And I think this constructive criticism is also very important, because once you just put your ego away and just listen what the other person is saying, whether it's a juror or whether it's a client, it might be helpful, it might not be. But once you are listening to the relevant person, I think that matters a lot as well. Because the design, once we are talking about design is all about solving problems or making things better. So it's not only about this artistic ego that comes into being, that I need to make it artistic, whether it works or not, whether it comes with a concept or not. It shouldn't be like that. You should have a very good rationale behind whatever you design. And I think this is one of the biggest learning for, I think, the next generation, because they are very much aggressive when it comes to defending themselves. So I think we need to put in that element of soft attitude, or to have this constructive criticism in them as well. So it's not only meant to thrash people out, it's just to make things better.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Ali. So how do you guys think that we can be more present in the policy-making areas somehow? I don't know, like as architects, how can we be more present in, I don't know, in the spaces that are happening by UN Habitat, in World Cities Day, in places that actually decisions are made? Do you guys have any, I don't know, suggestions about that?
So I think it will all start with more discussions. I think it will all start with more awareness that, for example, like let's suppose today's talk that we had, we can increase it more. We can have more discussions, we can talk to more people, and we can talk to, we can actually increase this bandwidth of people. Because once we have the people on board, once we have all of them on the same page, that is where we can actually make an impact. And we can have it, maybe weekly, or we can have it with a fewer people who can discuss what's happening in their city, what's happening there, in every city. So once we discuss projects, once we discuss the barriers that we are facing, we can help each other out. And once we start helping each other, once we create that community, that is, very different from the other people out there, I think that is going to make a relevant change. But it would take time, but we need to do things fast. We need to help people without expecting anything in return, because people do expect to have some money if they're helping, if they're putting in effort, which is okay. But I think we should go beyond that. We should help each other.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might add to that, like, as part of getting things done and helping each other, I think partnership with other disciplines and industries, for the realization of sustainable development goals, is also important. As architects, like, we, as part of our jobs, we're project managers and we coordinate different disciplines. And I think in that coordination, that collaboration kind of approach, I think we can have a wider impact, when we get outside of our, sometimes our insulated communities or networks can keep us from having a larger impact on our communities. And I think the more we impact our communities, the more we collaborate across disciplines, we will receive that more exposure, and we'll receive more, or I guess not we will, but the importance of sustainable development will receive more, attention and more care, amongst those networks that we're working alongside. And like the bigger it goes, you get into local governments and like participatory community development, and I think as we grow our networks, that awareness will also grow.
With that in mind, I just wanted to add something more. Being in the community, right? I think we are having these calls. This is okay, but I think we should have this group or WhatsApp group or something like that where we can actually just just talk out and just ask quick questions and just drop all these answers to each other. That would be pretty well as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great idea. If everyone agrees, we can do, I don't know, a LinkedIn group, a WhatsApp group that we can plan these calls on a more regular basis. And yeah, each person can tell their friends, the people that you think that might be interested. And like the way that we primarily thought about this, that it can move forward, is that like now this time we talked about, let's say, architecture and SDGs in general. What we wanted to do was to have these community calls, let's say, I don't know, every 2 weeks, every month, that each of them would focus on a specific SDG. And we can share good practices about that specific SDG, and like thinking about how architecture can contribute to that. Let's say, for example, to zero hunger, how can like a good architecture practice go about that, or no poverty, how can we work with, let's say, homeless people or immigrants, and what are some good practices in each of those. So I don't know if you guys think that would be a good way to move forward with it, like to get more specific with each SDG, or do you think we still need to have more general conversations about architecture and policy? Yeah, let me know what you guys think.
I think that would be lovely. And I think it would all start with that, community once it's built. Once it's on, for example, once we are connected on WhatsApp, right now we are only just 5 people, for example. Once it just, keeps on increasing to, for example, 500 people, to 600 or 2,000. And that is where once we, have our own experiences, once we share, for example, Carly shares her experience one session, right? For example, the next session you are doing that, the next session I'm doing that. So that is what, it's to keep this society intact on the longer term. And on the shorter term, we can have this conversation through WhatsApp messages, through through some useful links that we can actually use. For example, some materials that someone has, invented or found or discovered. So this is how I can be connected, you can be connected. For example, I'm in Pakistan right now. I don't know where you are based right now. I think you're in Iran, maybe?
No, I'm in Italy.
Sorry?
I'm Iranian, but I live in Italy.
Italy. I love Italy, by the way. So you're in Italy, right? So for example, I would know what's happening in Italy right now. You'll get to understand what's happening in Pakistan right now. And the same thing with Carly as well, for example, or Justin. So this is how we'll understand what's happening in the world, right? So this is a very quick tool. I think professionals are not actually using WhatsApp much because they are just keeping it on the emails. But I think we should go beyond that. I think we should use the technology as well as closely as we can.
Sure, great, yeah. We will make the WhatsApp group soon.
Yes. But just by the way, Arju, I think I have to leave for a meeting as well. But make sure let's have this group. Let's have this WhatsApp group. Let's initiate it today or maybe tomorrow, whenever you are free. Let's initiate that and let's bring our ideas and everything together.
Definitely. Yeah, if you can share your number just through LinkedIn with me, and
Yeah,
I will start.
I will. For sure. But thank you so very much. Nice seeing you both. Nice seeing Justin as well. I think it was my very first session, and I think I was very interactive. I would love to interact more. I would love to discuss more. A lot of things are happening. I'm also planning to have some projects on board, like abroad as well. So let's see how things go.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you for
Excited.
joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
So Carla, I know you're at work also now,
Yeah,
but
no,
what do you
I
think about a WhatsApp group, like things like that?
yeah, no, we're wide open. I have no other meetings to jump to right now. So yeah, something came to mind just now on the back of that last comment, but I'm trying to remember what that was. Oh, yes. In terms of influencing policy, I think your question kind of touched on, at what scale can we involve ourselves in the policy of, development and sustainability in the built environment. And I think, yeah, I think it would be overwhelming, personally, to just jump in and try to, go straight to the top of, the like the global level of policy, and I think it's much more appropriate and also the easier for us to influence kind of from the grassroots level. So I just wanted to kind of add that like if we as designers, as architects, as coordinators, want to impact policy on a grand scale, it's the same as the climate situation. Like, if we're going to make a change, it's going to happen at the grassroots and at the community level, with many different backgrounds. So yeah, so it's not, I think this topic can seem very heavy and overwhelming to a lot of people, especially those of us who feel like we're small in a big pond. And I think when we look at this from a grassroots level on an incremental scale, it becomes more digestible and more possible for us to influence how development happens and how people and how empathy is carried out in design. But yeah, just wanted to kind of add that point.
No, I think that's such a great point. And one thing that I like think about is that how can we maybe have both of those go together, in the sense that like maybe building knowledge on the ground level and experience, and then kind of if we have a network of this knowledge that has been built, then we can take it to the policy level and say this is a good practice, so let's go with that. Because I don't know, there are a lot of networks happening, especially as I told you before. Now I'm entering the food board, so I see what's going on there. And like when I compare FAO and then UN Habitat, I see so much more is happening in the food board rather in comparison to the, let's say, architecture and like urban development board. And people that are also working on the ground, they are trying to push forward also policy on a higher level. So I think it's something that you build knowledge on the ground, and then you try to go with your experience and show that, yeah, this is the way that the things get done. So let's change this specific policy now. Because I think if we balance the two work together, it's then that we can, I don't know, move forward and make bigger changes. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's great that you're getting experience in these different sectors, because then you can see, from different perspectives as you're working from the architectural mindset and process. You can kind of take in what you've learned from, working with different institutions.
Yeah, so I don't know, let's see. But I completely agree that the real change happens on the ground. But yeah, if we find a way to also translate that to a higher level, then I think that would be then really great. Of course, it's going to take a lot of time. But yeah, just to start it somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, we being the ones talking about this, and we, you know, who care about this this issue, and the urgency of policy shifting in development, I think we're the ones who are going to be doing it. And it's important to continue talking about it, but also taking action and setting out, you know, like we were saying earlier, like let's form a WhatsApp group, and let's form, you know, you know, networks that actually make change and actually, you know, engage with communities and do the work. And I think that the more that we take action in our own ways and our own practices with this kind of frame of mind, the more this grassroots development and change is going to happen. And we're going to look back and realize how things have changed and how we've been at the front lines of it. So this kind of conversation makes me very excited.
Yeah, okay, I completely agree. Yeah, if you can also share, okay, I have your number. If your teammates would like to also be a part of it, I would love to have their numbers. And I'm gonna make the WhatsApp group right today, and then we can also think about what would be possible conversations moving forward and what things can be done.